Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpattykake. I'm an author and robot, and today I'm about to cover a fairly contentious issue, so prepare your pitchforks, but also hopefully sit down with me, let's have a chat, let's not be too hasty, but I already know that this is going to tick some people off to even teeter around the subject. I don't know what I'm going to name this video yet, but I'm sure that that's already setting off some sort of alarms or pissing somebody off. But before we get started, a couple of things. If you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Unless you hate me, then, subscribe so I get the numbers, but you don't have to ever watch anything that I say or do ever again. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the two links in the description below, Lamoy and PitchFit. Not PitchFit, it's Fresh Meat Feature, duh. And number three, if you would like to check out my books, probably not a great place to plug them, since I'm probably going to attract people that do not like what I'm about to say or the conversation that we're going to have, but they're there. That's all that I'm going to say. Okay, so Bram Stoker Awards just happened. The Bram Stoker Awards are a specialized award in horror. You know, I've already talked about the romance genre and the Romance Writers of America, or Romance Writers Association, I think it's of America, but I can't remember, in detail, and the meltdown that they had with the RWA shit show. A couple years before that, there was Race Fail within the sci-fi fantasy community, and this is just horror's sketchy move in this direction of being obsessed with politics and favoring politics over literature, and it's something that I care about. It's the benching of arts and artistic merit for the purpose of pursuing politics. Now, I can't make any bold, brave statements that say, yes, this is 100% political, because I'm not on the inside and I haven't read all of these books, but I do encourage you to look at the list, which I'm going to link down in the description below. Go to the Bram Stoker website and just compare and contrast the nominations and winners from years past and how they've changed since 2016. I also want to mention that in 2015, there was a movement in the Bram Stoker Awards called Stoker's So White or something like that. And it's not lost on me that the RWA had the same situation where it was hashtag Rita's So White. And there's a certain irony and a possible connection that these are all run by the same political movements when they're using the same exact hashtags, except inside different genres. But in 2015, there was a movement of Stoker's So White, and then shortly after that, in the next year, and since years past, they have more and more gotten a diverse list. Now you tell me, is it the Bram Stoker Awards Committee admitting that they were racist, sexist, and homophobic the last few years, or are they acting completely politically for the approval of some people? So before we get started, though, I do want to say it's probably political because in 2015, Paul Tremblay won Best Novel, and then he won Best Novel again a couple of years later. But in 2015 specifically, it was for Head Full of Ghosts, and I read that book, and that book was freaking terrible. I hated it so much. I wrote an essay on it back in, oh my gosh, when did I write that essay? When did I write that book review? It was in 2017. I hated that book so much. But I can see why he won an award, because he is insanely political, which is what leads me to believe this is political and the Bram Stoker Award is political. Because Paul Tremblay is so insanely political that he put a political essay in the back of his book as to why progressive horror is better than conservative horror, and saying that The Exorcist is conservative horror. As a special added bonus to the discussion today, I'm going to go over that essay. I just hate politics being in my stuff, in my arts, and I hate people making everything about politics to the point where you can't even have normal discussions because they take it as a personal attack if you disagree with them, and then they infuse everything about their lives with politics and ruin everything with politics. Arts should be where we come together to experience different lives, different perspectives, different characters that are nothing like ourselves, that don't agree with ourselves, that may not even be decent people, but we're getting a look into somebody that isn't like us, and somehow we've gotten away from that. So what I wanted to bring up today with the Bram Stoker Awards is the 2021 nominations. So, and how it compares to years past and the political underpinnings that are happening all around the country, possibly all over media and entertainment, because we have seen this rise to actual force in diversity quotas. Now, we should all be against forcing things to fit into certain boxes, to have a certain percentage of anything, because in the creative sphere, that actually forces your creativity to take a back pedal. Imagine you wanted to do the Black Panther, but you were required to make 30 to 40% of your cast white. It pushes in your creativity and says that you cannot tell the story it is that you want to tell. Imagine that you're told 50% of your cast has to be male characters. That means that the women can't exist. That means that Manhunt can't exist. That means that the Savior's Champion cannot exist in the way in which it exists, because the majority of that book is male. It means I can't write the stories that I want to tell because I write majority male books. So if we start putting these crappy, forced quotas on everything, your story is not going to be the kind that you want to tell. It's not going to be realistic either. Like inserting a completely almost immobilized fat person into a dystopia. How are they still there 3 or 4 years in? This level of immobilized. It doesn't make sense. So we should be able to tell whatever stories we have to tell using whatever manners and mechanisms and character setups and quotas that we want, not quotas, but makeup that we want and need to tell our stories and to tell the best stories that we can. If you want to put the same number of every sort of demographic that you can think of in something, have at it. If you want to make everybody in your story gay, have at it. But I think forcing these sorts of quotas on things is dangerous and destructive to actual storytelling, and there's nothing but politics about it. And the same comes into play when you're forcing awards to become political. It's not without its personal benefits. When we go here to Lambda Literary Award rejects LGBT author as she defended friend accused of transphobia, we come down here to where Lauren Hugh says the Lambda Prize exists because when someone like me, which is to say a queer person, manages to publish a book with queer themes, those books are often ignored by mainstream prize committees. Prizes get media attention. Prizes create name recognition and bring in new readers. Prizes sell books. Prizes like the Lambda also come with a check. So there is a financial and publicity reason, I'm not sure how to turn that into an adjective, but there's a financial reason and a popularity exposure reason to start taking over these awards and giving them out to who you think should be boosted, not based on merit, but based on your political leanings. So, the Bram Stoker Award. It's kind of funny. If you look at the top 5 or the 5 nominations for Best Novel, Horror Novel of 2015, all of the nominees are white males, at least upon first glance. If you look at the next year, 2016, you've got some females inserted. If you look into the next year, you're starting to get away from that all-white maleness. Now, I'm not saying that some of these people can't be great at what they do or that people aren't coming out that weren't doing this kind of fiction before and are suddenly not becoming pop stars. But if we have to pretend that previously, in 2015, all of the top 5 novels were white male authors, and now across all categories, 71% of the applicants are women, people of color, or LGBT, and then in 2 categories, it's 80% women, people of color, and LGBT, then we have to question, was the Bram Stoker always racist, sexist, and homophobic, and they are now course correcting, in which, why aren't they being admonished? Or are we being astroturfed and people are being lifted up for political means, not because their works are good? Now, I'm not saying that people should be punished or that we shouldn't take people seriously when they're actually good at something. But when you're looking at such drastically shifted ballots in what is a political appearance of things, then you're kind of forced to start wondering if those were actually the best novels of the year or not. And this isn't specific to the Bram Stoker, because you've got the same thing going on with the New York Times bestseller list. You've got this with the USA Today bestseller list, where you go, are those actually the best books? Because if I look at these titles on the New York Times bestseller list, they all look very political to me. So was this a political shove, or were these books actually good? How often have you recently heard people saying they've either never heard of books that were on the bestseller list, or They tried reading these winning novels from this award or this bestseller list, and they were terrible. Somebody who is involved in the horror community, if you would like to mention it down below, do you think that the Bram Stoker Award Committee and the people who run it were just sexist, racist, and homophobic all along, and then now they're suddenly just course correcting? Or do you think that suddenly the quality in the work that white men did has dropped dramatically, and so now other people are coming in? Or do you think just other demographics are starting to write more where they hadn't, and submit more and be given more opportunities where they hadn't been given opportunities before? All of these are interesting questions and interesting ways to approach, and especially when you've got in that same political field, political artistic field, where people say if you're of a certain demographic, you're not getting any chances. But then we can look at these awards ceremonies and situations and nominations where you are where people in these different demographics are exceedingly getting opportunities and are exceedingly being nominated at the expense of white men being removed. So, are people getting more chances than previously? Are they doing better than previously? Or was there some kind of racism, sexism, and homophobia within these communities that was holding them back previously that's not holding them back now? This is what I want to ask. And how much do you think that you can swing the pendulum one way, assuming that everything was always this sort of ism, and now you're going to force a racism and a discrimination in order to make up for what you perceived as an ism, when people are not actually the best at doing what they do? I've recently had a conversation with somebody talking about the publishing industry and the publishing standards, the modern day standards, where it's frowned upon to have a majority male cast in your books. Now, that's something that I naturally do. If you watch my video recently where I talked about my 3 books, somebody actually asked me why my casts typically are either male, the main character is male, or I write more male-centric things. And there is a psychological reason behind that. I only partially get into it, but it's what I've always done. I have a preference for male casts, for male characters, and it's always what I'm typically more drawn to write about. If I'm going to be told that I can't or shouldn't write a 90% male cast when that is naturally just what I'm drawn toward, then where is the fairness in that as a writer? If people are going to look at my name as Ian Kirkpatrick and then go, oh, that is a white male, I'm not going to do anything with that, and then they look at my picture and they go, oh, that is a female, is that a female? I've been asked if I was trans a couple of times. What kind of assumptions do you want to make up about me? Where to push this, what I am, what I identify, where my background is at, what I have done with my life, where I have been in my life, what all of that do you want to guess to then decide whether or not I should deserve to be given an award for the book? If you have to ask what the gender or sexual identity or gender identity of somebody is before you can determine if they deserve a place on your list or if their book is good enough to deserve a place on your list, then you're not judging the book. I think this goes back to what I will talk about later in comparing The Men by Sandra Newman to Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin, where if you didn't know that Gretchen Felker Martin was a trans woman, then you might look at her depictions of trans women as disgusting because they're constantly talked about just being mannish and ugly and never going to pass. And in Manhunt, the descriptions of trans women are actually pretty disturbing, or rude, what most would call rude. But Newman, who is a biological female, she seems straight, but I don't know her personally, so she could be whatever. Just take that as you will. Try not to skewer me for that. But her identity seems like a white female. So she gets skewered for calling her book The Men when trans women are also taken away with the men because they've got a Y chromosome. So if you have to know what the author's identity is in order to know whether or not you should skewer the book for representation, then you're not judging a book based on the merits of the book or the storytelling. You're judging it on whether you believe the author is the correct identity for you to support. And that is a bad place to be in if we're going to discuss art and ideas and empathy and compassion and different scenarios. And we don't have to like the same books. We don't have to agree on the same direction. None of that. But I do think that we need to take merit seriously and not overcompensate with this sense of feeling and compassion that we need to make everything equal by discriminating against other people in order to course correct discrimination, because you don't fix discrimination with other discrimination. If you're interested in seeing more of what that looks like, I actually have what's a book review on this channel for Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, where in the most part I just read passages from that book. And what he talks about is his own racism towards other people, is his own judgment of black people with darker skin than him, is his own judgment of how he thinks that you should be racist against other people in order to correct other prejudices. He is so racist in his book that he can't even accredit a famous quote to the person who said it, because the book is so focused on trash-talking white people that he can't even give that one quote to the white man who said it, because white men have to be trash-talked in this book. So, point being, I'm just going off on a tangent now. Point being, I don't think future discrimination is the cure to past discrimination. I think if you overcompensate for what you feel like is a prejudice or discrimination of the past, you're actually just going to cause resentment among these different groups of people, thinking that person doesn't really deserve it, you're oppressing me, you're destroying me, and it's going to continuously be this game of these different groups of people feeling like the other person is attacking them at all times. We should be in storytelling for merit, and there's always going to be a level of subjectivity in discussing art and what you like about art, and different art's going to speak to us all differently, and that's perfectly fine. A book that has a more personal message that strikes you because you have a similar experience is not going to mean the same thing to me, and we'll judge them completely different when we go in to give a score to a book. I just appreciate if we could actually discuss what those elements of the book are instead of saying this author's identity. But this whole thing has gotten so political. And if you, specifically to the point of political, that if you talk about any of these issues, like I mentioned pitchforks at the beginning of this, and this has gotten so political to the point that if you even try to discuss this, you'll get attacked. A lot of people are afraid to have these conversations, or to try to have these conversations, or to say anything about any of this, because they're afraid to be kicked out or grouped up on, ganged up on, and destroyed, and have no possibility of the future of being involved as a writer. But I don't want to look at an awards ceremony and think that none of the people, or some of those people, didn't deserve the nomination, but they were given those nominations in order to show correct politics. I don't want to look at people who are getting published and think they only got published because of their race or sex or gender or sexuality, and that they didn't deserve it because of the hard work that they did. But that kind of stuff keeps coming up, and you see it from both sides. You see it from other people saying that person only got published because they're a white male, and it just breeds resentment. Now, I'm not even saying that you can't or shouldn't do this sort of stuff where you have these awards or these publishing houses or these opportunities that are specifically for these different demographics of people. However, if you are like the Bram Stoker Award, and if you are discriminating against people of who gets the awards, I'm not saying that Bram Stoker is, but if you are discriminating against people based on demographic information in order to be politically correct, I think you need to be honest about it, especially if it costs some money to submit somebody's work to your thing. Otherwise, I think you're defrauding people. Because if you have additional steps, additional requirements that people need to fall into in order to appease the judges to get an award or a nomination or a top spot, and you're not telling people that this is a requirement, and if you are a white male, you're likely not going to get anything, then you are defrauding people as far as I'm concerned, because people think that you are actually looking at books that are the best of the best, and you're not. Because you've got this political arm, and it's fine if you've got this extra political thing, but just be honest about it. If we could just be honest about our intentions and who we're trying to lift up and who we're trying to talk about, and that we can have different goals, then things would be so much better. Not everything is an insult if it doesn't involve you or if it doesn't directly reach out to you. And I think that's what I'm really really tired of, is I would actually just like to be able to talk to different people about different experiences and different perspectives, and maybe we don't really meet and agree on certain things, but we can at least see eye to eye that neither of us is being malicious, and we can have these interesting and deep conversations and not attack the other person for that difference. And I'm really tired of the aggression that is always accompanied with this, and the attack and the need to destroy. I think in part this is something that inspired some of the negative energy that is in Bleed More, Body More and the second book. You have a moment where Ralph says everything is an insult to a bankrupt soul, because there's so many broken people that are just hurt, and that hurt makes them want to hurt, and it severs the human connection that we have with one another and our ability to talk. So Bram Stoker, if you are being political, like many other awards, we've got the RWA that are already political, we've got the sci-fi fantasy that are already political. I'm pretty sure I've witnessed some other political leanings in awards that I have seen. If you do that, just say so that people can know before they submit to you, and so people can know when they look at books on your list how much weight they should give those books, because it's a fraud. Now, I think this essay that I did in response to Paul Tremblay is a little bit long for a video that's already 20 minutes long, but I will read this section briefly. His essay starts, "To riff on a George Orwell quote, no literary film or artistic mode or genre is free from political bias. That said, the political baggage of horror is considerable and oftentimes problematic. Many a smart person has argued, and convincingly so, that the horror genre is a conservative/reactionary one. Too often, with the ugliest political shades on display, misogyny, homophobia, xenophobia, ruling class, reimaginings of the other as invading monsters, from Freud's uncanny to the gender politics of the final girl. Perhaps no other genre is as fraught with such political anxiety. I know I struggle with those anxieties whenever I tell a stranger that I'm a horror writer and the person responds with, 'Oh, that's nice,' or some other awkward variant of a vague but unmistakable moral or intellectual judgment. I think everybody kind of go, 'Oh,' when you say that you're a writer. I don't think it's specific to horror, but I also think it really depends." I don't write horror. I've had that response. I'm going to get that response forever. And I've been called immoral and scum before for not writing horror and for writing things that I wrote a year ago before things happened in real life. So it's not personal. And I think that's one of the things that often also creates vitriol and anxiety and antagonism between different groups, is this interpretation or reinterpretation of what people are saying or haven't said, and then assigning context or further emotion to them or further thought to them than what the original speaker said. Now, I've been directly called scum for some of my books. I've been directly called racist for some of my stuff, because apparently I am responsible for a character's thoughts, but I'm not responsible for a character murdering another character, so that's interesting. But, "Oh, that's nice," and then saying, "Well, they're judging me unmistakably for a moral and intellectual failing." Where are you getting that? Unless that's not even an attempt at a straightforward where I have been called scum. Again, there's a misunderstanding and a desire to be victimized in some of this, so that you can make some moral judgment against other people, which this has already done, by the way, saying that everybody else who has written horror has done it as a reactionary conservative, and you're the moral high ground. Going on, my anxieties and neuroses aside, I want to discuss a more macro-political view of the horror story, focusing on an overall plot and, of course, the ending. I'm going to argue progressive structure will be more successful than a conservative/reactionary one if the story goal is to be, well, a horror story. They are many, they are legion, as opposed to the micro politics of subtext, character, and theme, and you get the drift, right? Let's briefly compare the films Alien and Aliens. I enjoyed both movies very much, but only one of them is a horror movie. Alien, of course, is the horror movie, and one of the finest and most sublime. It drips atmosphere from frame one. The design of Nostromo, the derelict spaceship, and of course, a facehugger, and the alien herself are nightmare fuel so potent they've become parts of speech within our cultural language. Within Alien, the scares and transgressions are many, but let's focus on the centerpiece, the iconic chest-bursting scene. After Kane's unexpected recovery from the face-hugging, we're rushed into the bright dining hall of the Nostromo's Last Supper. The body conversation of the relieved crew is a little too body, as though self-aware they'd loudly whispered past a graveyard. The violent birth of the alien from Kane's chest begins with his laugh turning into a choke, and then there's the thrashing and screaming. We know there's something catastrophically wrong with Kane, but not exactly what. The first spurt of blood arcs from his chest and splashes red on Lambert's face. There's this awful, perfect moment of stillness and silence, a recognition that passes through the crew on the screen and the audiences sitting terrified in their seats, a recognition of the truth. What happens next can't be unseen, and nothing will ever be the same again. Contrast to the chest bursting of Aliens. To be fair, the sequel would never be able to achieve this effect in the same way. It's still a horrific moment with the colonist being kept alive simply to be the host of the alien embryo. But she's faceless, a stand-in, literal cipher, not someone we know or really care about. The burster is quickly roasted in a baptism of fire by the Marines. Nasty 30-second scene, but it is set up. A scene used to build suspense for the anticipated ambush of the alien horde. There are moments of horror, of fright, even disgust, but it doesn't linger, and the movie as a whole plays as action and adventure. It's well done and suspenseful action/adventure, but it's not horror. Fast forward to the climax of Aliens, when Ripley emerges from the airlock in a badass forklift suit, ready to throw down with the Queen Alien. It's one of the ultimate crowd-pleasing moments in the history of film. The audience always cheers at that moment. Heck, I cheered. It's great fun. But if your audience cheers during the story's climax, then you're probably not a horror story. There's no cheering in horror. With the alien destroyed, the whole planet nuked for morbid, and the family unit reestablished and headed back, xenomorphs free to the good old USA. What we have is a reaffirming or reestablishment of social order and status quo. Emotionally effective, certainly, yes. We're happy for Ripley and the gang and their happily ever after, but that's not horror. In Alien, Ripley survives, which is still a happy-ish ending at first glance, but she's not unscathed or unchanged. The entirety of her crew is dead, proven to be no physical match for the new life form upon which she stumbled. She's left adrift in a small, ill-equipped, rickety escape pod. No one is coming to her rescue. No one knows where she is. Lost in infinity, she's alone, cosmically alone. Now that's horror. Let's take a quick look at one of horror's most famous movies and novels, The Exorcist, which is undeniably scary and still holds up amazingly well. The movie ultimately helped usher in the American modern horror movie renaissance, there we go, in the 1970s. Whereas so many famous 70s films that followed had been described as progressive, politically speaking, The Exorcist is a deeply conservative story. Is that part of the appeal? Probably. But there's little question that the 1970s audience reacted strongly to the breaking of taboos, the blasphemy, the exploitive and icky prurience, the gore, etc. I'm quite confident that when people remember the book or movie, very few people recall the last few pages or film frames. No, not Father Karras' tuck and roll down the stairs. I'm talking about the actual ending, with Reagan and her mom returning to LA, and everyone is healthy and all smiles as if nothing has ever happened. Who remembers that part of the story? Who remembers the relief, the few, everything is back to the way that it was with God in heaven, blah, blah, blah. No one. Of course, you remember the head spinning and the crucifix masturbation and the pea soup vomit. You remember the taboo and transgression, the great and terrible truth revealed within the universe of The Exorcist. I can't help but wish Blatty/Friedkin went on one more step and had asked the next question. What do people who lived through what they have lived through just now do, who have lived through what they just lived through? How do they live with this awful truth? Good versus evil, pristine little white girl saved by white men and religion, family values, upper middle class battling a foreign boogeyman, the demon Pazuzu, is first glimpsed in Iraq. So you really get into this, obviously, very quickly, how political he makes everything, and honestly, I think maybe an exaggeration. Probably an exaggeration, but when you make politics embedded into literally everything you do, like to this point where you're saying your films have to be red or blue. Your film voted for Donald Trump. Exorcist voted for Donald Trump. If this is literally what you're doing, I think you have a brain bug and you need to go and get checked out, because this is so over the top. But also, it's ridiculous in comparing it to what Tim Blay did in Head Full of Ghosts, because he ended the book and then he did a kind of where are they now time skip, because obviously here he's arguing that you can't just end the story where the story ends, because then that's conservative, because they have to live with the ending, the results, the traumas that they went through. But we're talking about this part of the book. You can end it in this part of the book. Where are they nows, not always, but often are overboard, are unnecessary, and don't really add a whole lot to the story. It's just extra. The book, or stuff like The Exorcist, where it ends shortly after the climax of the film, is not saying that the characters are totally sane, that they're not living with trauma and coping and unmeasurable distress from the traumas that they went through. But there's the assumption here that because it doesn't put it on screen, you have to assume that everything is perfect. And I don't think that's correct. And I also think that you're insane if you make everything into a red versus blue, which way did you vote thing, because stories are not that way. Humans are not that way. And this is ultimately the problem with the creative community at the moment, where everything is sorted into us or them. And it's dividing us instead of uniting our love and interest in art and replicating emotional experiences or real life experiences and sharing those with other people who have a different perspective or who might be interested in our perspectives. And this trickles into resentment and hatred for the other as soon as you start labeling people as the other. And you'd think that this would be more understandable, since it gets talked about a lot with race and sexuality and gender identity, but it's not. And it's ruining the camaraderie and the peermanship. Yes, I just made up that word. Among us creatives that should have this togetherness regardless of these other things. Anyway, this is long enough. This is getting also distracted, but because Paul Tremblay won 2 out of 3 of his nominations and was in the top best novels of the year, one of them being the stupid book that I read some years ago, I thought it was relevant, at least somewhat. Anyway, let me know if you've also read any of Tremblay's works. Obviously, people like him. I'm obviously not his target audience, which is fine, whatever. But can we just stop making everything political and stop painting everybody in red versus blue party and just be honest and just be people? I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to do on this channel, and I think some people just don't like it because I don't know. I don't know. I say, can we be people? And people tell me, what am I, a plant? Am I a fed? I'm not sincere. I don't know what I'm trying to do anymore, but I hope that we can actually just be kind to one another and actually have genuine conversations and not hate each other about difficult to talk about issues. Again, a lot of people avoid mentioning anything in these ballparks because you're so quick to be outed for anything, for any perceived anything, that nobody has the compassion or the patience to just listen to a perspective that's different. And they're ready to take everything that you say in the worst possible way. And that's just sad. I hope that we can someday connect human to human, or in my case, robot to human, someday, and not hate each other as much because we're trying to understand each other. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. I don't know what else to say, and every time I kind of ramble a little bit, I'm probably making it worse for myself. So, with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to your comments down below. Let's hopefully keep it civil-ish. Have a great weekend, and don't die. Hello, boomers! My name is Yanananana. In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines angry, dirty, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Yanni, there's someone here to see you. Americans. Americans? Yeah. Good morning. My name is Tom Cruise. This is my partner Bob Dylan, and we are big fans of your work. You're a couple of boomers. Actually, I'm a Gen Xer, but I digress. We'd like to sponsor you. Sponsor? What does that mean? We'd like to supply you with a couple of things to, help your channel explode. Who is it? Jan Bagan. Good. For a moment, I thought you were one of the Katsap looking for trouble again. What do you mean? They say they're looking for a terrorist. They want to declare war. What point is there to declare war? Human beings are simple creatures. You understand what drives humanity? You understand all human motivation. There's someone out there doing something bigger than your internet videos, and they won't hesitate to use you as a scapegoat. The Russians are begging for a reason to declare us hostile so they can take everything we have. Don't give them that reason, Jan. I should just go home, like Boris said, but I checked the video I posted last night and it has over 500 views. I'm going viral. I don't have a choice. I must produce another video. The jar I'm holding slips out of my sweaty palms. I can't waste any more time and go back for it. I grab my tripod saying sorry, while I keep moving. The jar explodes. I'm deafened by something so loud and powerful, it seems unreal. Jan, did you see that? Where the hell have you been? You mean the explosion? Yes. That was me. You needed to not do this today. You don't understand, Alex. I had to do it. I had to get the views. You're going to get yourself killed, Jan. No. They're looking for a terrorist. And how do you look different than a terrorist? I'm not trying to hurt people. Ignorance of war will not stop bullet from straying into your head.